Hi guys, welcome back to another video. Today I will be doing the 2024 election prediction between Josh Hawley and Tulsi Gabbard. I think this is a very interesting scenario. As you see, both candidates are pretty anti-establishment and pretty much on polar opposites, like Josh Hawley on pretty much on the towards the further right, whereas for Tulsi Gabbard's on the further left. But I think this is a very interesting matchup, and let's see who ends up winning. Guys, if you haven't, please subscribe to my channel. I already have an election night out, so my election night has been released. It was released on Saturday night, so you guys can take a look and go ahead and take a look at that. I have also been working and doing some mini election nights where instead of me actually physically making an election night, I just basically do election night where I just call each state one by one. And I'm getting used to it, guys. I'm not sure how to automatically insert the state, but I'll try. I'll learn. So yeah. So without any further ado, please subscribe if you haven't. Comment, and please, guys, comment down on my videos because because I'm not perfect, and wherever you guys think you disagree with, please let me know. Anyway, let's get started into this. Excuse me, guys. I got some hair on my foot. That's my mom's hair. Anyway, let's get started with Tulsi Gabbard's safe states. Pretty much what you typically expect from a Democrat, although I think if she was running against another Republican, I think she might do a little worse, but who knows? But, so we have New Jersey. Actually, not New Jersey, but actually. So we'll just do the typical Democratic safe states that you'd expect to go blue. So this is 166. So Hawley's typical safe states include Idaho. Montana probably safe. Well, it has been safe for like the last 2 cycles now, so much of Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, well, Missouri. I believe this would be the traditionally Republican safe states, Utah, and I think there is one more. Indiana. Yeah, Indiana. So this is what you typically expect, a Republican to start off with 125, but I think Hawley is a different type of candidate. He's not an establishment or typical moderate Republican, whereas Tulsi Gabbard is nowhere near a moderate Democrat. So I think this matchup is interesting, but definitely I do think Hawley will lose ground in certain areas. Like I believe Alaska, for example, Alaska, South Carolina, and Indiana, I believe he's going to lose ground. Maybe Kansas, but I'd say Kansas might be safe due to the fact that Hawley is from Missouri, so Kansans might know who Hawley is because of neighboring states' advantage. So I believe, yeah, guys, I don't know really a lot about Tulsi Gabbard, like how she'll do with minority voters, like how she's gonna do with black voters, like because if I knew how she would, then probably Mississippi wouldn't be safe for Hawley. But but typically Republicans do pretty well in Mississippi, so I think it should stay as a safe state for the Hawley campaign. But anyway, but Hawley will definitely digress in Alaska, South Carolina, and Indiana. He'll digress a little bit. So I think Tulsi Gabbard, I think she would win Colorado by a safe margin. Like like Josh Hawley would by the suburban voters, although they are pretty establishmentarian, but when you got to pick and choose between an extreme right candidate and a left candidate, a progressive left, you'd probably choose the progressive left unless you're on the right yourself. But this is not an insult to to anyone who's on the right. I understand why, but but I'm talking if you're an establishment voter, suburban voter that likes establishment candidates, but you're given two pretty populist candidates, except they're populist in their one way or another. And Hawley is more towards the right than Gabbard is towards the left. So the suburban voters might back Gabbard. So I think Gabbard in this scenario would do a little bit better in the suburban areas. Although in a state like Virginia, there might be low suburban turnout. Although I'm not implying Hawley's going to win the state against Gabbard. Hawley will definitely struggle in Virginia for sure, but the suburbs are kind of like not gonna like turn out as much. You know what I'm saying? Like how they turned out for Biden. They're not going to turn out the same way for Gabbard or Hawley. They're not going to. So I do believe Colorado will be safe, and I think New Jersey will be a safe state this time because New Jersey has a lot of white liberals here, and on top of that, you got Hawley, who is just pretty much on the right, so he's definitely going to alienate suburban voters here because New Jersey's a suburban state relative because the reason why our state only exists is because of Philadelphia and New York. If we and this NYC, if they were those two weren't there, our state would be like something like Iowa or something. We'd be like an Iowa level like population. So yeah. So I think New Jersey being predominantly suburban in its character, there are rural areas, but the suburban vote is pretty dominant here, as you have a lot of small cities and towns, but they do lean heavily Democratic. Like the county I live in is very Democratic. Like Biden, I believe, topped 60% of the vote in my county. So you know it's pretty clear, and it's pretty clear New Jersey is a suburban state after all. So so I think Hawley will start out with 102 electoral votes, and Tulsi Gabbard starts out with 190 electoral votes. So Hawley's likely states, I'd say Alaska would be likely. I think he would do a bit worse than Trump in Alaska because Hawley, I'd say, is a bit more extreme compared to Trump. I feel like Trump is more left wing, more to the left of Hawley. So I think he's going to alienate the moderate Republicans. But at the same time, those moderate Republicans will not vote for Gabbard. They'll just stay home. So I think Gabbard might do a bit better in there. South Carolina, I see that being another likely state. Although South Carolina does also prefer traditional Republicans, but at the same time, the urban centers are getting less and less conservative, like Greenville, which is a big city in South Carolina. That is getting less and less conservative to the day as you got immigration and you got the overall demographics of the city are moving it to the left. So I still do think, Gabbard will probably still get enough of the black vote to win, especially against someone like Hawley. I think she'll pretty much do about the same as Biden. I think maybe a little bit better than Biden. And my last state I see going on the radar is Indiana. I think Indiana will also be pretty. I think Indiana's going to be a lot closer because since Mike Pence was on the ticket, that's what helped Trump in Indiana. But Hawley doesn't really have that same suburban appeal. Like Trump was just lucky enough not to peel off too much of the Indianapolis suburbs, but even Hamilton County, a suburb of Indianapolis, got pretty close. So voters in the Indianapolis suburbs and Chicago suburbs, they might you think that Hawley is more like an extremist compared to Gabbard, although they may not like Gabbard, but they see her as less extreme. And plus, because Indiana is also fairly libertarian as a state too, like I believe the libertarian candidate got 11% of the vote in Indiana from the governor race last November. So I believe Tulsi Gabbard, with her being libertarian in her other views, I think she'd kind of do well with libertarian-minded voters in Indiana. So yeah, so Hawley right now is 125 electoral votes. Gabbard is 190. So Gabbard's likely states, they include Minnesota, New Hampshire, Maine at large, Virginia, and New Mexico. I say Minnesota, I think it's a predominantly working class, although the Minneapolis suburbs and Minneapolis itself dominate the state, but I think Hawley will does not have that same level of appeal as Trump does. Although I think Gabbard and Hawley would be interesting because both do have working class appeal. So, but it really depends on what type of working class they win. Like I think Gabbard could do a little bit better with ancestral Democrats if she picks a candidate like Bashir, for example. I think he would help her in the working class. But I think the working class would be evenly divided between Hawley and Gabbard. New Hampshire, I believe Gabbard will do pretty well. New Hampshire is also pretty libertarian as a state as well, and I believe Gabbard being pretty libertarian on social issues does kind of help her in the state, and she's pretty popular in the state as well. There were a lot of Gabbard signs out there in New Hampshire in 2020, so she's probably going to do pretty well in New Hampshire, I see. And Maine at large, she's probably going to do pretty well as well. I think she'd do slightly better than Biden because she's progressive. I think she'll do a bit better compared to Biden, but it won't be like a whole lot. It's not going to be like a whole lot. And Virginia, I'd see Virginia still being likely for Gabbard. I know Virginia is a very establishmentarian state. They love establishment Democrats. Like, go to the Northern Virginia suburbs. I can tell you, when you run a candidate like Biden, he does extremely well. But run someone like Bernie Sanders, he's going to really struggle there. Even in Loudoun County, he's going to struggle there too. So, but at the same time, I think the suburban voters would feel more turned off by Hawley than turned off by Gabbard. And plus, Virginia has a lot of military veterans too, so I think Gabbard being a military vet would probably help her as well. Being a military veteran would probably help her as well in Virginia. And yeah, I think those are all. Oh, I also forgot to put Maine's first district. That'll be safe for Gabbard. She's gonna do well there. So Hawley's lean states, they include Texas. I don't know how well Gabbard's gonna do with Hispanic voters, like whether she'll do about Biden, like, or she's gonna do better with Hispanics, but for right now, I'd say Texas is moving left. Like, the suburbs are really driving it to the left, and against someone that and Gabbard against someone like Hawley, I think she would be lucky as she'd probably do a bit better with suburban voters compared to Biden. But if she was running against someone like Nikki Haley, I think she would do a bit worse. Nikki Haley or DeSantis, I think she would do a bit worse in the suburbs. But since Hawley is pretty far right, guys, and I don't think it's false to say that. I mean, if you really look at it, he is. But I digress. But I do see Texas being a lean red state. I think Hawley would win it by about 3 to 4% against Gabbard. And the next lean state I see being, I think Nebraska second, provided that it's not gerrymandered, that'll be likely for Gabbard. Gabbard would win that by a likely margin. Maine second district, I think that would be lean R. I believe. Well, Tulsi Gabbard definitely has a lot more rural appeal. I think she'll do better in the rural parts of Maine, but they've gotten pretty conservative, so I think it's gonna be lean R against someone like Hawley. And I think the last state I see being lean R. I think there are two more states actually. I think Iowa and Ohio would both be lean R. I think Gabbard has working class appeal, so I think definitely she's gonna do a lot better in the working class counties like Mahoning and Trumbull. She'll do a much better compared to Biden because those voters saw Biden as as a puppet of the establishment, and Tulsi Gabbard not being a puppet of the establishment, I think she'll definitely do a lot better in the Cleveland suburbs, and she'll do better in the working class. But I think Ohio is a fairly rural state as well, so I think Ohio being fairly rural as a state, it's not like as rural as Missouri, but Ohio does have more rural land than Missouri, so less land does have more rural land than urban land. So I think Hawley at the end of the day will carry it by about maybe same thing as Texas. I do see Texas voting, Ohio voting slightly more Republican than Texas, but who knows? Ohio could be a surprise, and Iowa same thing. Iowa's pretty rural as a state, and those rural areas have trended pretty far to the right, which keeps the state red. But I think Gabbard could do better in the urban centers and the Des Moines suburbs, the Cedar Rapids suburbs. I think should do better than there, but I think the rural vote will keep and will give Hawley the state. So Tulsi Gabbard's lean states. I say Arizona would be a lean state. I know Arizona is very pro establishment. Like someone like Biden could do extremely well in 2024 without much of a problem, but Hawley is pretty much on. But the Republican voters there are very moderate, and when they see someone like Hawley, they'll be like, oh no, not that guy. They don't want him. So I think that's gonna hurt Hawley there. But I think Tulsi Gabbard, moderate in the independent, plus Tulsi Gabbard being pretty popular with independents, and her being pretty popular with independents, I think would really help her in Arizona. So I think at the end of the day, she'd carry Arizona probably 2 to 3%. Arizona is trending blue pretty fast. I do expect Mark Kelly to cruise to re-election unless some major scandal happens to him, or if it's a very strong red wave. But other than that, I really see Mark Kelly comfortably cruising to re-election because the major GOP candidate already has pretty bad relationship with Trump, so that's not going to help him either. And oh, there's some hurricane warning. Oops, not Nevada. Nevada, I see that being a lean D state. Like, I don't know how she's going to do with Hispanic voters, but I think she'd do improve in the working class areas. But again, I don't think there'd be like super high turnout in the suburbs. But I think Nevada is being a state that typically leans Democratic. I think Gabbard would win it by just maybe 3 to 4%, is my guess. And now here's where we get into like the six most competitive states: Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, which are pretty big, man, big states. I'd also say she'd carry Pennsylvania and Michigan by lean margins. Like Michigan, I think she's gonna do better compared to Biden. Definitely has rural appeal, so I think she's gonna peel off some voters there and disaffected Democrats and Republicans who, because of the status quo, they didn't want to. They just voted for Trump because since he's against the status quo. But but I think she'd maybe regress a little bit in Detroit and its suburbs. But again, with Hawley as a candidate, I think she'd probably do about the same as Biden and improving rural Michigan. So I think she'd do about Gore margins. I think she'd carry by just about the margin Al Gore carried Michigan by. Pennsylvania, I see that being a pretty similar same thing too. Pennsylvania is a pretty interesting state because it's not a very urban state, but it's not rural either. Like much of the middle Pennsylvania and western Pennsylvania are pretty rural, but the eastern parts of Pennsylvania are a bit more suburban, are a bit more suburban, and southeast Pennsylvania is pretty urban. So you got both. So it's very mixed. It has a very lot of rural areas, but lots of suburbs and small towns that do lean D, so lean blue. So I believe Hawley and Gabbard are both going to struggle in the suburbs, but if the suburban voters are going to choose the more moderate one, they'd probably choose Gabbard. So I think Gabbard would do win Pennsylvania by about the same as Arizona. I think Arizona and Pennsylvania would vote about the same. And yes, with Pennsylvania, Gabbard has won the election. I don't know whether it was Michigan, whether I clicked Michigan or Pennsylvania first. I clicked both at the same time, but right now, because usually Pennsylvania is the tipping point state, we'll just say Gabbard won with Pennsylvania. She won. She wins the election. And I think this is a pretty close election. I don't think it's gonna be like no candidate is gonna like enjoy a big blowout, but at the same time, this one's kind of hard to predict. So now I think these are going to be, I can comfortably say that, but I'm debating whether to put Wisconsin and Georgia in the lean D because Georgia is a very pro-establishment state. So it's very pro-establishment. They love neocons and neoliberals. Like neocons, like a neocon, like someone like Ronald Reagan would absolutely blow Tulsi Gabbard out of the water in Georgia, but someone like Biden would blow an extreme right candidate out of the water. Like if Marjorie Taylor Greene was the nominee, trust me, I could see Warnock blowing her out of the water. I don't think she's gonna be the nominee. She won't run, but at the same time, if she was to run, that's what would have happened. The GOP would have not nominated her anyway. So yeah, so this one is pretty close actually. I'd probably say Wisconsin would be lean. I believe the suburbs, like the Waukesha, Oshkosh, and the Wow counties. I don't know what I know. One of them is Waukesha County. I know is one of them, but I think Wisconsin will be lean. Like Gabbard will do better. It has working class appeal, so she's probably gonna do better in Southwest Wisconsin. I think she's gonna do better in the Milwaukee suburbs and Madison suburbs. She'll do better in because of Hawley. I think she'll do better than Biden, but again, I don't think. But Wisconsin can be told. I'm not going to underestimate Hawley and the amount of working class appeal he has. But I think it'd be pretty even. If I were to say it, it would be pretty even. Now, yeah, for tilt states for Hawley, I don't think Hawley has any tilt states. I think that's it. Hawley. I think Gabbard's gonna win the rest. Like, I don't know. Like, I'd probably say Florida. I'm debating whether to give Florida to Gabbard or Hawley because I don't know how Gabbard's gonna do with the Cuban American voters with her being progressive. I think they'll view her as a socialist. Hawley might call her a socialist and attack her for being a socialist. So I believe since Hawley might use socialism against Gabbard, although Gabbard, by the way, guys, is not a socialist. I cannot tell you stress how much the Republican Party uses socialism. Like no one. There's not even an actual socialist in American politics. None, not even one. Those who call Bernie a far leftist, he's not a far left guy. He's basically in the world he's seen as mainstream, and he's just a social democrat. Bernie believes in capitalism. He wants heavy regulations on capitalism. So I think Hawley might call Gabbard a socialist, and I think he'll take the state very, very narrowly. It's gonna be close. I think it's gonna be kind of like how what the Bush versus Gore in Florida. I think it's gonna be close. Like this one is so hard to predict. Like because Florida, well, might show polls leading. Gabbard might be blowing Hawley out like maybe 5-6 points, but that's what they said against Gillum versus DeSantis. But in the end, DeSantis won. So I think it's very hard, but I think Florida will probably narrowly back Hawley in this case. But I think Georgia will also go to Gabbard by a tilt margin. I think Gabbard will win Georgia by a tilt margin. Georgia's Atlanta and its suburbs are growing very quickly. It's not like North Carolina where the growth is more constant, it's more spread out. But in Georgia, you have one big area that's growing pretty fast, and it's growing crazy. Like Atlanta, I can tell you, has grown a lot since like 1980, of course. But I think even though both are pretty anti-establishment and not Georgia's type of candidate, but I think Gabbard would still have the natural advantage of being more moderate and being as controversial as Hawley. So I mean, Gabbard has the benefit of the doubt. I think North Carolina. This one is a very very difficult one because North Carolina is a swing state, but it typically leans Republican. Typically goes Republican though, but although Gabbard could break the trend, although North Carolina is also a military state, like it's not like as big of a military presence like Virginia. It's not as big, but North Carolina it has some military has military voters there too. So North Carolina, I believe, will be a very very difficult one. It's like in the loop. It's like within. It can go anything. I don't know, guys, how to say this, but North Carolina is just gonna be a crazy state. Like anyone can reasonably win it. Like I can give it to Hawley, but I can give it to Gabbard. Let's just say I'll just give benefit of the doubt. I'll give it to Gabbard. I know North Carolina will be extremely close. I'm not gonna lie. Whoever wins it, it's not gonna be like a 1 or 2 point victory. It'll be like Gabbard might carry it like by Obama margin. Obama 2008, I believe. I don't know if Gabbard is good with black voters. I think she might regress a little bit with culturally conservative black voters, but North Carolina, with its growing young population, especially those going to college, I think she'd do much better with compared to Biden. She'd do better because younger people are far more progressive. Well, on average, at least, not all young people, but they're much more progressive than the older generations are. So, if Gabbard can bolster youth turnout in the research triangle, if she can do very well in Charlotte, I think she would against someone like Hawley, and the Charlotte suburbs will narrow a bit and will narrow against someone like Hawley. So I think that'll allow the Gabbard to take the state. I think it's gonna be very close. I think like anywhere from 10,000 votes to 15,000 votes will separate the two candidates. Anyway, guys, this is my prediction between Josh Hawley and Tulsi Gabbard. Josh Hawley loses by 100 electoral votes, 219. The Gabbard's 319. Anyway, guys, if you liked today's video, please subscribe, and more content is to come. I know, guys, this is so controversial. I know this is extremely difficult, guys, to predict, because both of them are very anti-establishment, so they're not going to while they're not going to fit, they're not going to do well in the Sun Belt, but you know, but I think because of the Sun Belt's growth and the new Democratic voters, I think Gabbard is favored in the Sun Belt. Anyway, guys, if you like today's video, please like, share, and subscribe. Subscribe to my channel for more, and more content is to come. I will see you guys all in the next video. Political predictions out.